The faint scent of toast and coffee hung in the air, a familiar morning ritual in the Rodriguez household. Maria's hands, etched with the fine lines of a life spent working for others, moved with a practiced grace over the worn laminate countertop. She carefully sliced the crusts off 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, her movements as rhythmic and certain as a prayer. Beside the sandwiches lay 2 small folded pieces of notebook paper. On one, written in a neat looping cursive, were the words, "To my brilliant Sarah, remember that your mind is a garden. Tend it well. I am so proud of you. Love, Mom." On the other, the letters were a little larger, a little rounder. "For my sweet Lily, you shine brighter than any star. Never let anyone dim your light. Love, Mom." She tucked each note into a brown paper bag, a small daily act of love that was as essential as the food itself. In a world that offered them little, Maria ensured her daughters' hearts were always full. Her universe consisted of 2 celestial bodies, Sarah, her studious, resilient 17-year-old, and Lily, her bright-eyed, imaginative 12-year-old. Everything she did, every floor she scrubbed, every table she waited on was to keep their small world spinning. "Girls, the comet is threatening to stay asleep forever if we don't leave now," she called out, her voice warm but laced with the familiar urgency of their morning schedule. The comet was their 3rd family member, a 20-year-old sedan whose faded blue paint was chipped and peeling. It coughed and sputtered to life with a dramatic shudder, its engine groaning in protest against the cool morning air. It was a constant, rattling reminder of their place in the world, a world that measured worth in horsepower and brand names. As they pulled up to Northwood High, the contrast was a physical blow. Gleaming luxury cars glided into pristine parking spots, their polished surfaces reflecting the imposing brick facade of the school. The comet chugged into a spot at the far end of the lot, as if seeking refuge in the shadows. As Sarah stepped out, clutching a stack of textbooks to her chest like a shield, a cherry-red convertible purred past them. Tiffany Sterling was at the wheel, her blonde hair catching the sunlight, her laughter sharp and condescending as she looked their way. Her friends, a clique Sarah privately called the Elite Cruel, joined in the chorus of amusement. "Look, it's the scholarship case," one of them sneered, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Did your mom pack you another sympathy sandwich in a paper bag?" Tiffany's eyes, cold and blue, swept over Sarah's simple jeans and worn-out sneakers. "Be nice, Jessica," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Not everyone's dad owns half the city. Some people have to try." The word try was delivered like an insult, a verbal flick to the forehead. Sarah's cheeks burned, but she kept her chin high. She focused on the double doors of the school, picturing them as the gateway to the prestigious university she dreamed of. The scholarship was her golden ticket, her escape velocity. It was the only thing that mattered. Lily, watching from the back seat of the Comet, saw the exchange. Her small hands balled into fists, but she also couldn't help but stare at Tiffany's sparkling earrings, the way her designer bag caught the light. The yearning in her heart was a confusing mix of anger and envy. That afternoon, the world tilted on its axis. Maria was in the middle of her second shift at the downtown diner, balancing a tray loaded with plates of steaming burgers and fries. She felt a sudden, sharp pain in her chest, a tightening vice that stole her breath. The diner's cheerful clatter faded into a dull roar in her ears. The tray slipped from her grasp, crashing to the checkered floor in a cacophony of shattering ceramic and splattering ketchup. The last thing she saw before the world went dark was the horrified face of a customer. Hours later, the sterile, antiseptic smell of St. Jude's Medical Center filled Sarah and Lily's senses. They sat huddled together in uncomfortable plastic chairs outside their mother's room, the rhythmic beeping of machines a terrifying new soundtrack to their lives. A doctor had spoken to them in calm, measured tones, using words like exhaustion, arrhythmia, and observation. But all the girls heard was the deafening sound of their own fear. Seeing their mother, so tirelessly strong, lying pale and still in a hospital bed with tubes attached to her arm, was like seeing the sun fall from the sky. The foundation of their world had cracked. If your own heart is pounding with worry for this family, give a like to send them strength through the screen. The next morning, the girls returned home to a house that felt unnervously quiet and empty. The comforting scent of coffee was gone. The silence was a heavy blanket, suffocating them with what-ifs. They were trying to figure out what to do, how to manage, when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the small house. It wasn't the gentle tap of a neighbor. Sarah opened the door to a man who seemed to have stepped out of a different reality. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than their car. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and he held an antique leather briefcase that looked like it held the secrets of empires. He was utterly, jarringly out of place on their worn welcome mat. "Good morning," he said, his voice a low, calm baritone that commanded attention. "I am looking for Maria Rodriguez or her next of kin. My name is Mr. Thompson of the law firm Sterling and Finch." Sarah's mind immediately leaped to the worst conclusion. Medical bills. They were already drowning, and now this. "My mother. She's in the hospital," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. We don't have any money." Mr. Thompson's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. "I am not here about medical bills, Miss Rodriguez," he said gently. "I was instructed to find your mother, or in her absence, her children. May I come in for a moment? I have something for her, for all of you." Hesitantly, Sarah stepped aside, and Mr. Thompson entered their living room. He seemed to take up all the space, his presence making their humble furniture look smaller, shabbier. Lily watched him from the doorway of the kitchen, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. He placed the heavy leather briefcase on their small, scarred coffee table. The sound of the brass latches clicking open was unnaturally loud in the silent room. He didn't pull out a sheaf of intimidating legal demands. Instead, he carefully removed a single thick envelope sealed with wax and a stack of documents bound in a neat portfolio. "This," Mr. Thompson said, his gaze steady and serious as he looked from Sarah to Lily, "is a message for your mother. And this," he tapped the portfolio, "will explain everything." He slid the envelope across the table. It stopped just inches from Sarah's trembling hand. The air grew thick with unspoken questions. Who was this man? What could a high-powered lawyer possibly want with their family? The briefcase sat open on the table, a portal to a world they couldn't begin to comprehend, its unknown contents promising to either save them or shatter their lives completely. A profound, terrifying shift was coming, and they were standing at its very edge, breathless and unprepared. The air in the small living room was thick with the scent of antiseptic from Maria's hospital bracelet and the heavy, expensive smell of old leather from Mr. Thompson's briefcase. He snapped the two brass latches open with a sound that seemed to echo like a gavel, silencing the frantic beating of 3 hearts. Sarah stood by the armchair where her mother sat, her hand resting protectively on Maria's shoulder. Lily was perched on the edge of the worn-out sofa, her eyes wide and fixed on the case as if it held either salvation or doom. Mr. Thompson, a man whose suit probably cost more than their car, moved with a practiced, deliberate calm. He didn't produce a stack of medical bills. Instead, he withdrew a single, cream-colored envelope sealed with dark red wax and a small metallic object that looked like a futuristic memory stick. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he began, his voice a low, steady baritone that commanded attention without ever rising. "My firm, Sterling and Finch, represents the estate of the late Marcus Thorne. I believe you knew him, a very long time ago." Maria's face, already pale from her hospital stay, lost another shade of color. The name hung in the air, a ghost from a life she had buried decades ago. Marcus. I haven't heard that name in almost 20 years. Her voice was a fragile whisper. "He never forgot you, Maria," Mr. Thompson said, his professional facade softening for just a moment. "He passed away 6 months ago. Before he did, he left very specific, very detailed instructions." He slid the metallic device into a port on a slim, state-of-the-art tablet he produced from the briefcase. "He wanted you to see this." He turned the tablet to face them. The screen flickered to life, showing an old man sitting in a large leather chair. He was frail, his face a roadmap of deep lines, but his eyes, a startlingly sharp blue, seemed to look right through the screen and into Maria's soul. It was Marcus Thorne, but not the vibrant young man she remembered. This was a man at the end of his life, heavy with the weight of his legacy. "Maria!" the recorded voice rasped, filled with a profound affection that transcended time and technology. "If you are watching this, then I am gone, and I am sorry. I am sorry for a great many things, but most of all I am sorry for the secret I had to keep." He took a shaky breath. "When you left, you took my heart with you, but you also gave me a purpose. I knew the world I lived in, the world of immense wealth. It was a gilded cage. It could poison the purest soul. I couldn't let that happen to you. I couldn't let it happen to our child." Maria let out a choked gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Sarah's grip on her shoulder tightened, her knuckles white. "Our child." Thorne's eyes on the screen were wet with unshed tears. "I hired the best people to watch over you from a distance, to ensure you were safe but to never interfere. I had to let you build a life on your own terms, a life of value, of struggle, of love. I had to know that the character I saw in you, that incredible strength and kindness, was real and would be passed down. I wanted my heir to understand the price of a gallon of milk, the dignity of a hard day's work, the simple joy of a note in a lunchbox." He smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "They told me all about the notes, Maria, every day." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Now the time for secrets is over. Everything I have built, every company, every stock, every last dollar, it is yours. It has always been yours. Mr. Thompson will explain the details, but please, Maria, teach them, teach our daughters, and what truly matters. Don't let the numbers erase the lessons. Cherish what you have built. That is my final wish." The screen went dark. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Maria's quiet, shaking sobs. Sarah knelt beside her, wrapping her arms around her mother, her own mind reeling. Lily was frozen, her expression a mixture of shock and dawning, electrifying comprehension. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat softly. He opened a thick, leather-bound portfolio. "The estate of Marcus Thorne, he said, his voice returning to its formal cadence, is valued, after all taxes and debts, at approximately $92 billion. $92 billion. The number didn't compute. It was an astronomical figure, a string of zeros that had no meaning in their world of overdue bills and second-hand clothes. Sarah felt a wave of dizziness. $92 billion. They were worried about a $100 copay just yesterday. But for Lily, the number landed like a match on dry tinder. The initial shock quickly burned away, replaced by a wildfire of possibility. Her eyes, which had been wide with fear a moment ago, now sparkled with a feverish intensity. This was it. This was the key to the life she had only ever seen through shop windows and in glossy magazines. The days that followed were a blur of legalities and disbelief. But once the first transfer of funds was made, a sum so large it looked like a typo in their new bank account, the reality began to sink in, and the family began to split along a fault line that had always been there, now violently torn open by the earthquake of wealth. Lily was the first to plunge in. The sputtering, loyal Comet was the first casualty. Within a week, it was gone, replaced by a gleaming, cherry-red convertible that sat in their driveway like a spaceship, landed from another planet. Lily would spend hours just sitting in it, her hands caressing the smooth leather steering wheel. The new car smelled an intoxicating perfume of success. Their small closets, once carefully organized with thrift store finds, were suddenly overflowing. Boxes from Chanel, Gucci, and Prada piled up in the living room, monuments to Lily's unrestrained joy. She paraded around the house in clothes that cost more than their monthly rent, each new purchase a desperate attempt to shed the skin of the person she used to be. If your heart is racing with a mix of fear and excitement for what this money will do to them, go ahead and hit that like button, because this is just the beginning. Sarah watched it all with a mounting sense of dread. At first, the relief was overwhelming. Her mother wouldn't have to work 2 jobs. They could fix the leaky roof. Sarah could go to any university she wanted without the crushing weight of a scholarship application. But the relief was quickly replaced by a strange, creeping emptiness. The laser-like focus that had defined her entire life began to blur. The complex calculus problems that once thrilled her now seemed tedious. Why spend hours studying for a scholarship she no longer needed? She found herself scrolling through websites for Ivy League schools, not looking at their academic programs, but at their tuition fees, laughing at the absurdity of it. The number was meaningless now. Her grades, once a source of immense pride, began to slip. A B- on a history paper she would have aced a month ago felt less like a failure and more like an irrelevance. The siren song of their new life was luring her away from the shore of her ambitions, and she was letting the current take her. Maria saw it all. She saw Lily's frantic consumerism, a desperate attempt to buy a new identity. She saw Sarah's ambition dimming like a dying ember. She moved through their suddenly cluttered house like a ghost, touching the expensive silk of a new dress or the cold metal of a new appliance, feeling nothing but a profound sense of loss. She kept hearing Marcus Thorne's voice in her head. Spend wisely. Cherish what truly matters. What did that mean? When the very fabric of what she cherished, her daughter's character, their shared bond forged in hardship, was unraveling before her very eyes. The change didn't go unnoticed. The neighborhood, once a place of quiet, supportive nods and shared cups of sugar, became a buzzing hive of gossip. Mrs. Gable, from across the street, who used to bring over casseroles when Maria worked late, now watched them from behind her curtains, her expression a cocktail of awe and resentment. The mailman lingered a little too long, hoping for a glimpse inside the new reality. Whispers followed them at the grocery store. Some were friendly, laced with an insincere, grasping curiosity. Others were sharp with veiled envy. They were no longer the struggling Rodriguez family. They were an anomaly, a spectacle. The invisible walls of wealth were already rising around them, isolating them from the very community that had once been their safety net, and Maria could feel the chill of that isolation seeping into the foundation of their home. She looked at her two daughters, one mesmerized by a diamond bracelet on her wrist, the other staring blankly at a textbook she hadn't opened in days, and a cold fear gripped her. The money had saved them from poverty, but she was terrified it was about to cost them their souls. The whispers started as a low hum, the kind of background noise you might mistake for cicadas on a summer evening, but they grew quickly into a distinct, sharp buzz that followed the Rodriguez family everywhere. It clung to the sleek, cherry-red convertible that now sat in their driveway like a boastful alien spacecraft, dwarfing the faded lawn gnomes that had stood guard for years. It echoed from the parade of delivery trucks that clogged their narrow street, disgorging boxes stamped with names Maria had only ever seen in glossy magazines. Their neighbors, the same people who had once brought over casseroles when the girls were sick and offered to jumpstart the sputtering comet on cold mornings, now offered only clipped hellos. Their smiles were tight, their eyes lingering on the new landscaping, the freshly painted trim, the sheer undeniable evidence of change. Old Mrs. Henderson from across the street, who used to share gossip with Maria over the fence while watering her petunias, now just watched from her window, her face a mask of pinched curiosity and something that looked painfully like betrayal. The community that had been their safety net had become a gallery of silent, judging eyes. This new corrosive atmosphere was most potent at Northwood High. The bullying hadn't stopped. It had mutated into something far more insidious. Tiffany Sterling, no longer able to mock Sarah for her worn-out jeans or second-hand backpack, had recalibrated her attacks with venomous precision. She and her clique now circled Sarah in the hallways, their laughter sharp and brittle. "Look, it's the lottery winner," Tiffany drawled one afternoon near the lockers, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Sarah tried to ignore her, focusing on the combination of her lock. "Tell me, Sarah," Tiffany continued, stepping closer, her expensive perfume cloying and aggressive. "Does it feel good to buy your way in? Or do you still feel like you're playing dress-up in your mummy's new money?" Sarah's shoulders tensed. "Leave me alone, Tiffany." "Oh, I'm just curious," Tiffany said, leaning against the neighboring locker, trapping Sarah. "It must be weird, pretending to be one of us after all those years of free school lunches. You can buy the clothes, but you can't buy class. Everyone here knows what you really are." She gestured vaguely at Sarah's new leather jacket. That jacket probably cost more than your dad's entire child support payment. Oh, wait. A cruel smile played on her lips. There wasn't one, was there? The words were a physical blow, knocking the air from Sarah's lungs. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about her history, her family, her very identity, all of it twisted into a weapon against her. She saw her old friends, Amy and Jessica, standing a few feet away, their eyes fixed on the floor. They hadn't spoken to her in a week, not since Lily had picked Sarah up from school in the convertible, music blasting. The chasm that had opened between them felt a mile wide. Stripped of her pity, Tiffany had armed herself with pure envy, and it was 1,000 times more painful. Sarah slammed her locker shut, the sound echoing the turmoil in her heart, and pushed past Tiffany without another word. That night, the fissures cracking the family apart became deep, jagged canyons. They sat around a new, polished mahogany dining table that was far too large for their small dining room. The silence was thick, broken only by the clinking of silverware on plates. It was Lily who finally shattered it. "I saw the most amazing house today," Lily began, her eyes shining with an excitement that felt alien in the tense room. "It's in the Crestwood Hills enclave. It has gates, a 24-hour security guard, everything. No one could bother us there. No one could even look at us if we didn't want them to." Sarah put her fork down. "A gated community. You want us to hide, Lily? It's not hiding, Sarah." "It's being smart," Lily retorted, her voice rising. "Don't you get tired of it? The way Mrs. Henderson stares, the way everyone at school whispers behind your back. We don't have to live like that anymore. We could have privacy. We could have peace." "That's not peace, that's a prison," Sarah shot back. "Our peace was here in this house with our neighbors. This is our home. Or did you forget that?" "How could I forget?" Lily scoffed, gesturing around the room. The peeling paint, the drafty windows, the furnace that sounded like a dying animal every winter. I remember it just fine. And I'm ready to move on. Why are you so determined to cling to being poor?" The accusation hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Maria, who had been listening with a growing ache in her chest, finally spoke. "That's enough, both of you." Her voice was quiet but carried a weight that made both girls fall silent. "We don't talk to each other that way. Not in this house." "But Mom," Lily pleaded, her frustration bubbling over. "Don't you see this is our chance to escape? We could live anywhere, be anyone. Why would we choose to stay here, where everyone remembers us as the charity case?" The words charity case landed like a punch to Maria's gut. Was that how her daughter saw their life? As something to be escaped, erased? She looked from Lily's desperate, hungry eyes to Sarah's hurt, defiant expression. The $92 billion hadn't brought them happiness. It had brought a sickness into their home, poisoning the very bonds that had once been their greatest strength. The idea of a mansion, once an absurd fantasy, now felt like a real and terrifying possibility, a gilded cage that would sever their last ties to the life and the community that had, for all its struggles, made them who they were. Later that evening, after a retreat to their separate rooms, Sarah sat at her old familiar desk, the surface scarred with years of homework and late-night studying. Her laptop was open to her university application portal, but the words on the screen were a blur. A recent history paper lay beside it, a bright red C+ slashed across the top. It was the lowest grade she'd received since middle school. Her focus, once a laser beam, was now scattered, her ambition diluted by the easy, glittering promise of her new life. Why kill herself studying for a scholarship she no longer needed? The thought was a venomous whisper in the back of her mind, one she couldn't seem to silence. Her phone buzzed with a text from Amy. "Heard Tiffany was being Tiffany today. You okay?" The message was kind, but the distance in it was unmistakable. Before, Amy would have been right there with her, furious on her behalf. Now, it was an inquiry from across a great divide. Sarah typed back a simple, "I'm fine," knowing it was a lie. She felt utterly alone, adrift between the world she had outgrown and a new one that didn't want her. Downstairs, Maria moved through the quiet house like a ghost. The designer handbags Lily had left on a chair looked garish and out of place. The enormous state-of-the-art television mounted on the wall was a black, unblinking eye. This wasn't her home anymore. It was a showroom filled with expensive, meaningless things. She picked up a framed photograph from the mantelpiece, a picture of her and the girls from 2 years ago, huddled together under a blanket during a power outage, laughing as they made shadow puppets on the wall with a flashlight. They had nothing then, but they had everything that mattered. Her eyes filled with tears. How had she let it go so wrong? The weight of Marcus Thorne's request, "Cherish what truly matters," pressed down on her. Her mind drifted back to that bewildering day with the lawyer, Mr. Thompson. She replayed the meeting in her head, searching for a clue, a piece of guidance she might have missed. He had been so precise, his words so carefully chosen. And then a fragment of a memory surfaced, hazy at first, then sharpening into focus. As he was packing his briefcase, Mr. Thompson had paused. "Mr. Thorne was very methodical," he'd said. "His final instructions are comprehensive. Everything you need is in here." Instructions, plural. He hadn't just been talking about the financial documents. Maria was sure of it. Had he said something about a second message? A final directive? A sudden, desperate urgency seized her. She felt a profound, instinctual need to find their family's true anchor before they were swept away completely by this tidal wave of wealth. She hurried to the small closet where she had stored the antique leather briefcase, its polished surface feeling cold and heavy in her trembling hands. Placing it on the gleaming mahogany table, she stared at it, her heart hammering against her ribs. There had to be something more, a reason for all of this that went beyond mere money. With a surge of adrenaline, her fingers fumbled with the tarnished brass latches, popping one open then the other. The lid creaked as she lifted it, revealing the neatly organized files within. But her eyes weren't on the papers. They were searching for something else, something hidden. A final piece of the puzzle that she knew with every fiber of her being had to be there. The birthday cake sat on the vast marble island like a jeweled afterthought, its perfectly piped roses wilting slightly under the recessed gallery lighting of their new cavernous kitchen. It was Maria's birthday, a fact that felt as foreign and ill-fitting as the silk blouse she wore. A gift from Lily that felt more like a costume. The air, conditioned to a precise, sterile chill, carried none of the familiar warmth of their old home, no lingering scent of fried plantains or the cheap floral air freshener she used to plug into the wall. There was only the faint, chemical smell of newness and the heavy silence of a space too large to be filled by just 3 people. Lily tried to break it, her voice unnaturally bright. "Happy birthday, Mom. See? I got the chocolate one with the raspberry filling, your favorite." She gestured towards a mountain of exquisitely wrapped boxes on the dining table, each tied with a satin ribbon. "And that's just from me. Sarah has hers over there." Sarah offered a weak smile from the corner, clutching a single modestly wrapped book. The tension between the sisters was a palpable thing, an invisible wall of resentment and misunderstanding that had been building for weeks. Maria's heart ached with a pain far deeper than the one that had sent her to the hospital. This new life, this boundless, suffocating wealth, was supposed to be a miracle. Instead, it felt like a slow-acting poison, leaching the color and connection from their lives. She looked at her daughters, Lily, wrapped in a designer dress that cost more than their old car, her eyes hungry for a validation she never seemed to find, and Sarah, whose own eyes, once bright with academic ambition, were now clouded with a confusing mix of guilt and temptation. "Thank you, Mika," Maria said, her voice a near whisper. She forced a smile, but it felt brittle. As Lily began eagerly describing the Italian leather handbag in one of the boxes, a memory surfaced in Maria's mind, sharp and clear. It was Mr. Thompson, the lawyer, his kind but formal eyes looking at her over his steepled fingers. Mr. Thorne was a meticulous man, he had said. He believed in second chances and second messages. At the time, she had been too overwhelmed to process the strange phrase. Now it echoed in her head with the force of a revelation, a second message. An intuition, fierce and undeniable, seized her. "Excuse me for a moment," she said, her voice suddenly firm. She walked past the opulent gifts, past the bewildered looks on her daughters' faces, and went straight to the antique leather briefcase that now sat on a mahogany credenza. a relic from a life they no longer understood. Her hands, still calloused from years of work, trembled slightly as she clicked open the tarnished brass latches. The scent of old paper and leather filled her senses, a grounding aroma in this sterile palace. She ran her fingers along the worn silk lining, pushing past the copies of deeds and stock certificates. There, tucked into a hidden flap she'd never noticed before, was a small, unmarked USB drive. Without a word, she walked to the 85-inch television that dominated the living room wall. Lily started to protest. "Mom, what are you doing? We're about to cut the cake." "This is more important," Maria said, her voice leaving no room for argument. She fumbled for a moment with the port on the side of the sleek screen before the drive clicked into place. The screen went black, then flickered to life. It was Marcus Thorne's face again, but he looked different, older, softer. He wasn't in a sterile office but in a comfortable study, a fireplace crackling behind him. He looked directly into the camera, and it felt as though he were looking straight into Maria's soul. His voice, raspy with age but filled with a profound warmth, filled the silent room. "Maria, Sarah, Lily. If you are watching this, it means some time has passed. It means the initial shock of your new reality has settled, and perhaps its true challenges have begun to emerge." He paused, a sad wisdom in his eyes. "I have left you a fortune, but money is a tool, not a destination. It can build bridges or it can build walls. I fear you may have started building walls." Lily shifted uncomfortably. Sarah leaned forward, her expression rapt. "Wealth," Thorne continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "does not reside in your wallet. It is forged in the indelible memories you create, in the kindness you show, in the lives you touch. I have seen great fortunes destroy families, and I will not let that happen to mine. That is why I have left you not just with funds, but with rules, binding stipulations to my will." The air crackled. "First," he said, his tone becoming more formal, "a substantial portion of the inheritance, 30%, is to be immediately placed in a trust to establish the Thorne Foundation. Its sole purpose will be to provide vocational training, educational grants, and emergency financial support for laid-off workers and their families. Your fortune came from industry. It is your duty to give back to those that industry sometimes leaves behind. Second," he went on, as Lily's face began to pale, "our strict family spending cap is now in effect. It is generous, more than enough to live a life of comfort and security, but it is finite. It is designed to prevent reckless extravagance and encourage thoughtful stewardship. The days of unrestrained purchasing are over." Lily let out a choked sound, a strangled gasp of outrage. "He can't do this. It's our money." Thorne's image on the screen seemed to look right at her. "Third, for you, Sarah. Your academic goals are paramount. The funds are there to support your journey, to pay for tuition, books, and living expenses so you can focus on your studies. They are not there to replace your effort. Your scholarship is your achievement, a testament to your hard work. You will earn it because true value is found in what you build, not in what you are given." Sarah's shoulders, which had been tense for weeks, visibly relaxed. A long, slow breath escaped her lips, a mixture of relief and shame. "And finally," Thorne said, his voice softening again, "your home, the small house you grew up in. It is to be preserved. You may renovate it, make it comfortable, but you may not sell it. It is not a monument to past poverty, but a living symbol of your values. It is an anchor. It is the place where sheet forts and pizza nights must remain sacred traditions, non-negotiable pillars of your family bond. Remember who you were in that house, Maria, because that is who you truly are." The screen went black. The silence that followed was heavier than any before it. It was broken by Lily, whose face was a mask of fury and betrayal. "This is a joke. He gives us everything and then snatches it away. I'm calling the lawyer." But Maria was weeping. Silent tears streamed down her face, not of sadness but of profound, gut-wrenching relief. It was as if a massive weight she didn't even know she was carrying had been lifted from her soul. She looked at the sterile, opulent room, at the ridiculous mountain of gifts, and saw it all for the hollow prison it was. Thorne hadn't taken anything away. He had given them their lives back, He had given them a map back to themselves. Days later, the atmosphere at Northwood High was a toxic brew of rumor and envy. Word had spread, twisted and warped, that the Rodriguez family's fortune was somehow fraudulent, or that they were on the verge of losing it all. Tiffany Sterling, stripped of her ability to taunt them for their poverty, had been seething, waiting for a crack in their new gilded facade. This was the opening she craved. She cornered Sarah by her locker just as the final bell shrieked, her elite cruel clique flanking her like designer-clad vultures. "Well, well, Sarah," Tiffany sneered, her voice dripping with condescension. "I heard your fairy tale has a catch. Is it true your dead billionaire grandfather put you on an allowance? How embarrassing. Guess you're not so different from the rest of us after all." A few weeks ago, the words would have pierced Sarah like shards of glass. She would have flushed with shame, stammered a defense, or simply fled. But something had shifted in her since that night in the living room. She looked at Tiffany, at her perfect makeup, her expensive clothes, her desperate need to inflict pain, and for the first time, she felt not fear, but a strange, aching pity. Before Sarah could respond, a quiet voice cut through the hallway chatter. "Is there a problem here?" It was Maria. She had come to pick the girls up, and she stood there, not in silk or designer labels, but in simple jeans and a clean, pressed blouse. She looked calm, her presence radiating a quiet dignity that seemed to suck all the air out of Tiffany's performance. Tiffany turned, momentarily thrown. "We were just having a chat," she said, recovering her smirk, "talking about how money can't buy class." Maria met her gaze, her eyes unwavering. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You are right," Maria said softly, and the entire hallway seemed to fall silent, students pausing to watch the confrontation. "It can't. It also can't buy loyalty, or a family that loves you, or a home that feels safe." Each word landed like a stone in a still pond. Tiffany's smirk faltered. She looked from Maria's steady gaze to Sarah, who now stood straighter, a quiet strength in her posture. She saw Lily arrive at Sarah's side, not as a rival but as an ally. And in that moment, in the face of their unbreakable, silent unity, Tiffany Sterling's carefully constructed world shattered. Her mask of cruelty crumbled, and underneath was just a desperately lonely girl. Her eyes welled with tears. She furiously tried to blink back. Her voice, when it came out, was a ragged, broken whisper that only those closest could hear. You always had each other." She looked at Maria, her expression one of raw, painful envy. "That's the one thing my father's money could never buy me." And with that confession hanging in the stunned silence of the hallway, Tiffany turned and fled, her clique scattering in confusion. The crowd of students parted for her, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. Everyone had just witnessed not a victory, but a surrender. Maria put her arms around both her daughters, pulling them into a tight embrace. They stood there for a long moment, a fortress of three in the middle of the crowded hall. The whispers that followed them as they walked out of the school that day were different. They were no longer whispers of jealousy or suspicion, but of awe. And everyone was wondering what the silent billionaire and her family would do next. The flickering image of Marcus Thorne faded from the oversized screen, but his voice lingered in the cavernous living room, its quiet wisdom echoing off the cold marble floors and designer furniture. For a long moment, nobody moved. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered the memory of Thorne's words. It was Lily who broke it, not with a shout or a sob, but with a single sharp intake of breath that sounded like something inside her had just fractured. She stared at her own hands, at the perfectly manicured nails and the weight of a diamond bracelet that suddenly felt as heavy and cold as a shackle. The cherry-red convertible outside wasn't a symbol of freedom anymore. It was the four-wheeled embodiment of a cage she had gleefully built around herself. Without a word, she rose and walked out of the room. Maria and Sarah watched her go, a shared, unspoken fear passing between them. They heard her footsteps on the stairs, then the sound of her bedroom door closing with a soft, definitive click. Sarah made a move to follow, but Maria gently placed a hand on her arm. "Let her be for a moment, Mija," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Sometimes you have to get lost before you can find your way back home." They sat together, mother and daughter, the $92 billion truth settling not as a victory, but as a profound and terrifying responsibility. An hour later, Lily reappeared in the doorway. She had changed out of her silk lounge set and was wearing a pair of faded jeans and a simple grey t-shirt, clothes from her old life. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, and her eyes were red-rimmed but clear, as if she had cried out all the confusion. In her hands she held the keys to the convertible. She walked over to Maria and placed them gently in her mother's palm, her fingers closing over Maria's worn ones. "I don't want it," Lily said, her voice barely a whisper. It doesn't go anywhere I want to be." She then turned to Sarah, whose textbooks were still stacked on a corner table, a monument to a dream she had almost abandoned. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Lily said, the words catching in her throat. "I got so caught up in what we could buy that I forgot who we were." Sarah didn't hesitate. She stood and wrapped her arms around her younger sister, holding her tight. "We're still us," Sarah murmured into her hair. "We just took a little detour." In that embrace, the fissures that had begun to crack their family apart started to mend. The intoxicating illusion of wealth had shattered, and in its place something far more real and resilient was beginning to grow. The next morning, Lily sold the car, and the week after, box after box of designer clothes and handbags were quietly donated to a local women's shelter. She didn't make a show of it. It was a private, necessary shedding of a skin that no longer fit. She started spending her afternoons not at the mall, but in the local library, rediscovering a love for books she thought she'd lost, her laughter once again filling the small spaces of their home with genuine, uncomplicated joy. For Sarah, the transformation was just as profound but quieter, an internal recalibration. She looked at the scholarship acceptance letter she had pinned to her bulletin board months ago. For a few dizzying weeks, it had seemed obsolete, a relic from a life of unnecessary struggle. Now she saw it for what it was, a testament to her own grit, her own mind, her own effort. It was an achievement that could not be bought. She pulled her textbooks toward her, the familiar weight a comfort. The scent of old paper and ink was the scent of her future, a future she would build herself. Her grades, which had slipped into a perilous decline, became her singular focus. She stayed up late, not scrolling through online boutiques, but wrestling with calculus problems and annotating classic literature. The fire of her ambition reignited, burning brighter and purer than before. When the school's academic awards ceremony arrived, and Sarah's name was called to accept her scholarship, she walked onto the stage with a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with the money in her bank account and everything to do with the knowledge in her head. She saw Lily and Maria in the audience, their faces beaming with a pride that was worth more than the entire Thorne fortune. Maria Rodriguez, once a ghost in the city's service economy, found her own new purpose. The community that had watched her with a mixture of pity and envy now began to see someone else entirely. They stopped calling her the lottery winner and started calling her, in hushed, respectful tones, the silent billionaire. But Maria corrected them whenever she could. "I'm just Maria," she'd say, with a smile that reached her eyes. She met with Mr. Thompson not as a bewildered heiress, but as the active, engaged chair of the Thorne Foundation. Her past was not a weakness to be hidden, but her greatest strength. She understood the gnawing anxiety of a single unexpected bill, the quiet desperation of a factory layoff, the silent dignity of working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. The Foundation's first major project was not a grand architectural marvel, but something deeply practical. They intervened when the old Northwood textile mill announced its closure, a move that would have devastated hundreds of families. The Thorne Foundation didn't just write a check, it funded a complete retooling of the plant and established a comprehensive vocational training program, giving the workers new skills for a new economy. Maria was there on the first day of the reopening, not in a limousine, but in her reliable, lovingly maintained old station wagon, the Comet's worthy successor. She walked the factory floor, shaking hands, listening to stories, her presence a quiet assurance that this wasn't charity, it was solidarity. She was building a legacy of kindness, not just currency. And they stayed. The idea of a gated mansion in a sterile, exclusive enclave was dismissed without a second thought. Their small, simple house, the one that held the ghosts of their struggles and the echoes of their laughter, was not a monument to past poverty, but the very anchor of their lives. They didn't tear it down, they revitalized it. A fresh coat of sunny yellow paint, a new roof to replace the one that always leaked, and a garden in the backyard where Maria planted tomatoes, cilantro, and roses. It became a beacon in the neighborhood, a symbol not of sudden wealth, but of enduring values. Even Tiffany Sterling, who saw the Rodriguez family not at galas but working in their own front yard, felt the last of her venomous envy curdle into a strange, unfamiliar longing for something authentic, something real. The story concludes not with a ribbon-cutting ceremony or a newspaper headline, but on a simple Friday night. The grand living room, once a showroom of uncomfortable opulence, was now a chaotic, wonderful mess. Blankets and sheets were draped over chairs and couches, forming the familiar lopsided architecture of a sheet fort, just like the ones they used to build when the girls were little. The air was thick with the warm, greasy, perfect smell of pepperoni pizza. Inside the fort, illuminated by the soft glow of a string of fairy lights, Maria, Sarah, and Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, sharing slices from a cardboard box balanced on their laps. Lily was recounting a funny story from the library, her laughter unburdened and bright. Sarah, taking a break from her university prep courses, chimed in, playfully teasing her sister. Maria watched them, a feeling of profound peace settling deep in her soul. She saw not an heiress or a scholarship winner, but her daughters, whole and happy. Marcus Thorne's fortune had given them security, but his wisdom had given them back to themselves. Here, in the soft light of their makeshift castle, surrounded by love, she understood the deepest truth of her inheritance. The most precious legacy one could ever build was not an empire of assets, but a home steeped in love, integrity, and resilience, a sanctuary that no amount of money could ever truly buy.